Hey guys, Troubletcat here, recording for the Zombie Arcade, and today I'm reviewing the Close Quarters DLC. This is a pretty long video. There's a couple of reasons for that. I wanted to show you guys every map. I'm playing the CONQUEST Domination game type here. One of the two new game types. There's this and Gunmaster. I'll talk about Gunmaster in a separate video. I see it as kind of a side thing, not the main thing for the DLC, so I'll talk about that in a side video, as I said. And so I wanted to show you guys, as I think I already mentioned, a little bit of all the maps in this video, talk about the maps for the most part. For the weapons, you know, the details of those will be in my Meet the Weapon series, which all you regular viewers are probably familiar with. And aside from, you know, the fact that I wanted to show all the maps and talk about the DLC and all the maps in a fair bit of detail in this video, this is also sort of a dual-purpose video. This is also serving as the third part of my Meet the A3 videos, so hopefully in a bit I'll find a little bit of time to talk about the loadout. Here I'm using a red dot sighted suppressor and a foregrip. But mostly this video is going to be about the DLC and the new maps. So this one, the first one we're going to look at is Danya Fortress. I don't have a whole lot of footage on this map in particular. It's the one that I think I showed the least of. But the basic idea of this map is it's this sort of Middle Eastern palace, but it's built on top of some like old construction, an old bunker or something. So there's an underground section, and there's these upstairs areas where it's a really nice palace, and there's these gardens and stuff. Hanging out near C flag here, which is in part of the palace. B flag is underground in a corridor, you'll see that later. And towards the end you'll see A flag, which is up in this sort of sniper perch at the other end of the fortress from C flag here. It's a pretty decent map. I actually think, to speak about the DLC a little bit more generally, I actually think most of the maps are, well, all the maps are relatively well designed. I'm not a huge fan of one of the maps, SCRAPMETAL. I'll talk about that when we're looking at SCRAPMETAL later on in the video. But overall, I actually feel like the design on these maps is really tight, is really good. And I have to say, if you guys saw the trailers, how it's, you know, crazy chaos everywhere, people dying constantly, all that kind of crap, that's not really what this DLC is like. Most of the gunfights you're going to be in are at closer range, although there's a bit of medium range stuff too on most of the maps. In fact, on all the maps there's at least one area where there's some medium range combat and stuff like that. So it's mostly at close quarters, as the name implies, but with 16 players, the intended amount for these maps, it's not a crazy massive clusterfuck of constant death. You really can sort of tell what's going on. You spend a fair bit of time moving around the maps, not seeing that many people. And I'd say that it's not exactly slow-paced, but it's slow enough that there's definitely a certain level of tactics, strategy involved. You will have a lot of scenarios where, you know, people come up behind you and stuff like that, because the maps are very, very complex. They have a lot of different levels, they have a lot of different paths around them. These are, as I said, very, very complicated maps. I'd say my biggest tip for playing these maps would be, if you want to be successful, stick with your squad, because there are so many different directions enemies can come from at any given time that it's just crazy hard if you're not with your teammates. It's really, really bad if people get too spread out. You just kind of get fucked from all angles. Anyway, second map we're going to look at is ZIBA Tower. This one is kind of an upper-class, like, penthouse bar thing on the roof of a skyscraper, I guess. This is a pretty cool map as well. It's a bit smaller than Danya Fortress, but it's nice. Again, very complicated, a lot of rooms, a lot of different places people can come from. So, one of the big features that this map is a particularly good one to talk about it on, as is Operation 9 to 5, that you'll see at the end of the video, is the HD destruction. As I said, that's most noticeable on this map and Operation 9 to 5, where walls and doors and glass and there's all this stuff blowing apart and crap, and it's actually, it's really nice. It does look really, really good. It's really satisfying to see how much the environment reacts to being shot up and stuff like that, and I think that they really did pull it off with the HD destruction. Again, since the maps aren't quite as chaotic as the trailers made it out to be, you don't quite see as much, you know, every single wall is blown apart, everything's fucking busted to shit at the end of the game. Unless you're playing on PC and you play in like a 32 or 64 player match, which I will mention, 32 player matches are actually pretty playable on these maps. They're very, very fast paced, but they're actually fairly playable. Unlike what I thought the situation might be, 16 players, as I said, is actually somewhat, it's not slow, but it's more deliberately paced than you'd expect. So, yeah, unless you're playing on like a 32, 64 player game, you know, you don't have everything completely blown to shit, But it is really nice to see the effectiveness of your weapons, you know, tearing walls apart and stuff like that, and you can actually create new paths through the level sometimes. That was a pro revive, I think. The guy sort of, I revived him, and then he fell down and probably no, he was fine. He fell into the water. Good teammate. So I like that. The new game type is pretty much the same old Conquest we're used to. The only difference is the flags have smaller capture zones and capture faster. But it's pretty familiar. The games can be very short if one team's dominant. They can last for like 5 minutes. They normally go for around, yeah, they normally last between 5 and 10 minutes if things are fairly balanced. So that's, you know, okay. I think I prefer a little bit higher ticket count, you know, 15, 20-minute matches. But these games are fine too, little sort of shorter matches. It's a good game type. I don't have a whole lot to say about the game type in particular. It's Conquest, you know. I will say, the way the maps are designed, most of the capture points, which are very small, there's not a lot of places to hide at the capture points. There might be a little bit of cover, but there's definitely nowhere you can go and really be safe at any of the capture points so much. It's really important, again, to be running with your squad on these maps and making sure you've got a lot of angles covered. These are actually maps that, if I thought BF3 was good for competitive play, which, yeah, it could be worse, I guess. I think these would be the maps that would be sort of better suited to competitive play. These maps and Squad Rush on the existing maps would probably be the best things. Due to, like, these maps have very tight design, as I said. It seems like they've actually thought of quite a bit in terms of, you know, what are going to be valid camping spots, defensive positions, where you're not going to be safe. There's a lot of places where you're not safe. And it really seems like there's a big focus in the sort of way the maps are designed, complicated with a lot of levels, fairly open in a lot of cases. There's a big focus on needing to run with your squad, needing to have good communication and good situational awareness to keep all the angles covered. I do think this DLC provides a good experience overall. I don't know. I can't recommend this to everybody, I will say. You know, if you're mostly just interested in the vehicle gameplay, if the idea of sort of shorter matches, a little bit faster paced stuff, all focused around close quarters gunplay doesn't sound good to you, don't buy this DLC, and, you know, unless you got premium, in which case you're going to have it anyway, but, you know, don't go out of your way to buy this DLC if that doesn't interest you. But I think that for what it is, they've actually pulled it off really well. The maps are well designed. It's pretty fun to play. I'm not sure, you know, if I had a choice between playing only close quarters maps all day, every day, and a mixed map server, I'd choose mixed maps. I think my preference would probably be like a 24-player server running Rush and regular Conquest and running these maps as well with 24 people. If I was to have a server with all maps in the game on it. 32 players on these maps is, as I said, playable, but it is kind of crazy. It's not too bad, actually. So, if you're wondering, aside from Conquest Domination, the only game types you can play on these maps are Team Deathmatch, Squad Deathmatch, and Gunmaster. As I said, I'll talk about Gunmaster in its own video later. But Team Deathmatch and Squad Deathmatch are how you expect. They work very well on these maps, I will say. These sort of tighter maps, again, are suited to those more sort of fast-paced game types. It's pretty dope. So, I mean, that covers my overall impressions of the DLC. Do I recommend you buy it? The weapons are good. I will mention briefly, I talk more about those in detail on my Meet the Weapons series. If you're interested, check that out. But the weapons are good. The maps are good. Scrapmetal is probably my least favorite map, the one you're seeing right here. But it's not a terrible map by any means. I recommend it if, as I said, if the idea of closer quarters, faster games in BF3 sounds appealing to you. I do think that DICE pulled off the concept well. They're not my favorite maps in the game, not by a long shot. I think maybe Back to Karkand is probably a better DLC overall, but I guess that's because I prefer more sort of medium-sized maps with a bit more variety. But even as somebody who prefers that, I still appreciate and do enjoy, get some fun out of these maps. Speaking of which, Scrapmetal here, the third map we're seeing in the DLC. This one, as I said, is my least favorite of the maps. The basic design here is you've got two warehouses, we'll call them A warehouse and B warehouse because there's a flag in each of them, A and B flag, connected by, there's about 3 ways to get between them, 3 different bridges, and one of the bridges, the central bridge, has the C flag on it. This is, I mean, the overall map design is a pretty cool concept. It's pretty tight. You can get on these rooftops. B warehouse is 1 level taller than A warehouse. It's a very vertical map. And as you can see there, I was exposing myself to the other rooftop without realizing I got taken out. It's a very vertical map. The only reason that I'm not a fan of this map compared to the other maps is, as you can see, it's very dark in here. I mean, you've got a lot of dark shadows, and you've got these sort of light shafts, and the big sort of contrast in lighting, particularly, and the darkness, and how sort of this map is fairly cluttered in particular. It makes it very, very hard to spot people. That doesn't make the map bad necessarily, but it does make it, it's not my favorite when maps are so dark and so cluttered that it becomes very, very difficult to see people if they're camping and stuff like that. This is actually the only map in the game. I'm not doing it in this video because I wanted to show this particular loadout on the AUG, which I will get to talking about in a second, I promise. The reason this is one of the few maps in the game where I actually like to run attack light just so that I can see better. You know, I don't like it so that I can blind people, but I like to run attack light on this map because it's one of the few maps where there's enough dark areas, enough dark corners and stuff that I find attack light actually does really help you to see what's going on and to spot people more easily. Not a terrible map, but as I said, my least favorite in the DLC. So. Finally, at last, as I said, this is a bit of a dual-purpose video. Gonna take a moment here to talk about this setup I'm using with the AUG A3 with the foregrip suppressor red dot sight. As I said earlier, the foregrip is a really good attachment on the AUG. It kills your horizontal recoil, which the AUG has a lot more horizontal than vertical recoil. And the suppressor kills most of the vertical recoil on this gun, so with this loadout, you'll notice you have very, very low recoil. It's very good close-up sort of loadout with the CQB sight there, the red dot sight. And since the AUG has such good hip-fire accuracy to begin with, although the suppressor hurts it somewhat, still pretty accurate from the hip. I don't like the suppressor on most guns since the suppressor nerf. I don't like it. It feels... I just don't like the way it makes the guns feel much since then. I've always felt like, you know, it kills the damage too much at medium and long range and stuff like that. And I mean, for my personal preferences. But on close quarters maps like this, that's not going to hurt you too much. And aside from that, the AUG is one of the few guns where I actually don't mind the suppressor now, even after the nerf. You know, even on somewhat larger maps, this is still a reasonable loadout to use on your AUG A3 if you're into the stealth thing. It is particularly good on these closer maps and team deathmatch game types and stuff like that, where staying off the radar can help you a lot in tight areas with lots of corners and stuff like that, and make it a lot harder for people to find you. So that suppressor is good, and of course, also very, very important is the fact that the gun looks pretty pimpin' with this loadout, in my opinion. And as we've discussed before, you know, your battlefield swag is probably the most important thing in the weapon loadout. Not so much effectiveness, but more so how your weapon looks. Engaged in a this is a really high traffic area on the map. You'll sort of want to learn where the high traffic areas are on this map, because the game type, the fast captures, does actually change the dynamic of Conquest a little bit. You'll find that on these maps, a lot of fighting is focused around the flags, but there's more fighting happening in between flags than in regular Conquest, and the reason for that is because flags can be captured so quickly, and because the maps are designed in such a way that most of the flags don't have much cover on them, you really, really want to try and hold your enemies back a bit from the flags. You can see there we're trying to hold them in that staircase on the side there. Anyway, last map we're going to look at, another one that I really like, Operation 9 to 5. Basically, this map is a big office building, like a really high-tech office, with the garage under it, which you can see here, which is a lot of sort of cool gunfights happening down here. I like this area of the map. And so you've got this kind of high-tech office, you've got the garage, and you've got sort of a wing of the office that's still under construction. And this is the other map where HD destruction really comes into a lot of play. You've got a lot of sort of desks and computers and stuff like that breaks apart really easily. You've got these kind of thin plaster walls that bullets tear apart in moments. This is, again, another really good map to see the destruction, and one of my favorite maps, I think, in the DLC. I think my absolute favorite from the DLC would either be Danya Fortress or ZIBA Tower. This one would probably be third, and then SCRAPMETAL my least favorite. But as I said, I don't hate any of these maps, and SCRAPMETAL loses by a pretty long way. I still quite enjoy this map. So you can see this area I'm in here. Well, behind me with the computers and stuff. All that stuff behind me is incredibly destructible. You know, you'll see somebody at the far end, and you'll just shoot through those little screens and desks and stuff to try and kill them. It's pretty cool. You don't necessarily always see a lot of gunfights happening there every match. I find there's actually quite a bit of variation in these maps in terms of, well, they all have a few different areas to them, with the exception of Scrapmetal is all pretty much the same. I mean, one side is run down and one side isn't, but there's not a huge difference. But aside from that, all three maps have a fair bit of variation in terms of different kinds of areas you're going to see. And more than that, because of the way the match plays and because of the way, you know, different people take different routes and stuff like that, you'll find that the gunfights you're in focus around different areas of the map on different matches, so that gives a bit more variation as well. You can see here I'm spending a lot of time over in this under construction, or more like under destruction, am I right, guys? Part of the office. But you know, in other games of this, I might spend a lot of time out near the lobby, which is at C flag, or hang out at the cafe at A flag upstairs guarding that, or, you know, even in the garage. As I said, there's a lot of different areas to these maps, and quite a bit of variation, actually. And I do like that. Grabbing a different kit here, because it was really low on ammo. You'll see me use a couple of different things here. So, getting towards the end of the video now. Final thoughts on the DLC. You know, I think I mostly covered it earlier. It's a good DLC if it's going to be something you're into. The maps are, to be honest, I really do. You know, I prefer sort of more medium-sized, a bit more variation, a bit more sort of different styles of gameplay on my maps. But I will say one thing that does really impress me about these maps is the level of detail. You can see on this map, you know, you've got all these objects and stuff like that around. You've got all this detail crammed into a tight area, and they're pretty impressive. I do quite like these maps, you know, the way they look and stuff like that. And aside from that, I feel like they're well designed. They play pretty well. They can be a bit chaotic at times. It can be a bit annoying having people flanking you constantly. But that just means, you know, you need to play this with your squad. You need to stick with your buddies and have people, you know, having really tight situational awareness, checking all the angles and stuff like that to be really successful on these maps. I really like that as well. These maps seem to be really focused around tight squad play to be really successful, and that's pretty cool. Whereas a lot of the bigger maps are more focused around your team's overall thing. These maps are more about your sort of tight moment-to-moment tactics and positioning and situational awareness and stuff like that, which is a nice little change. Yeah, I like these maps, and I mean, aside from that, you know, they're not as hectic. I was a little bit worried from the trailers that it'd just be, you know, retarded, fucking running around, you know, spawn, die, spawn, die, spawn, die, and some people seem to feel that they're that way, but I find that if you take things a little bit slower, if you don't, you know, suicide rush the objectives, you check your corners and have good situational awareness, you can stay alive for quite a long time, actually, and there are still good periods of time where you're sort of moving around the map. You don't see that many people, but they're pretty tense in this map because there's so many corners and stuff like that. You're always looking for where the next bad dude's gonna be. Anyway, that's pretty much the end of this video, guys. Remember to let me know what you thought of the video. If you're new and want to see more videos like this one, remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Until then, Troubletcat out.